The Tom Woods Show, episode 652.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, if you enjoy this show, you're really going to like the free course I've made available to you on the real history of the U.S. presidents. Very, very helpful, especially during an election year. Check it out at freehistorycourse.com. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. We're going to talk about that Donald Trump speech. I know it's a few days old at this point, but, you know, ideas are eternal. Or I don't know. I don't know how to make up for the fact that we're a few days late on this. But anyway, it's a speech that Donald Trump gave at the Center for the National Interest, which is the sort of umbrella institution that publishes the National Interest magazine. And there's been a lot of commentary on it both ways. People say it's terrible. People say it's great. People say it's in the middle. And I get people saying this is the restoration of an America First foreign policy. And I get people who say it's the restoration of an America First foreign policy, and that's terrible. So we want to get to the heart of what's really being said in this speech. I read it myself, but I thought, let's bring on the guy I would most want to talk to about the speech, and that's Scott Horton, host of The Scott Horton Show, which you can find at scotthorton.org. And he is also the host of Anti-War Radio on KPFK 90.7 in Los Angeles. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here.
I've had a number of requests to talk about the Trump speech, and in fact, I specifically had somebody saying, bring Scott on to talk about the Trump speech. So then when I was looking into this, I saw that I think you did an episode of your show on the Trump speech, but, well, I want to do an episode of my show on the Trump speech, so that's why I'm bringing you on.
Great.
So I looked at it, I read the whole thing, and I read a few people's commentaries on it, and it seems like it's one of those ink blot tests. You know, it depends on your personality, how you're going to interpret the speech. It's one of those kinds of speeches. I've got a bunch of passages that I pulled out that I thought we might want to talk about, but before we do that, what's your overall impression of this speech? And by the way, for people listening like way in the future, we're talking about a speech that was delivered in the end of April 2016, and it was billed as an extremely important, defining foreign policy speech for Donald Trump. All right, go ahead.
Well, just overall, kind of in a word, absolutely horrible.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And yet, see what I mean? That I read Pat Buchanan's column on it, and Pat is running victory laps, saying, isn't this great, the return of the national interest? Has Justin Raimondo written anything on it as far as you know?
Yeah, he's very much in Pat's corner on that, yeah.
Okay. All right. See, now, if only he would learn how to do Skype, then I could get the two of you guys on, and that would be a fun episode. That right there, that would be a good episode.
Yeah, I don't know.
We got to send somebody over there and force him to learn it. To heck with it. All right, anyway. Let's then, given that that's what I now know is your reaction, let's start off by trying to pull out anything in the speech that might be considered good. Now, the things that I consider good are let's say some of them anyway, deal with his interpretations of the outcomes of past wars, the Iraq War, the interventions in Libya, Egypt, Syria, etc. I think on that, he's saying things that are true, although these days they're so true that they're almost commonplaces.
Yeah, well, is it okay if before I slam this guy, I talk about Hillary Clinton for just a second? By way of disclaimer, really.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I absolutely hate Hillary Clinton. And I mean, in a terrible, childish way. I'm not a mature person, Tom. I really absolutely loathe her. And I'm fairly certain, when I really try to be as honest as I can about it, that she is absolutely the most horrible, single, individual human being on the planet Earth. And if I was St. Peter, I would have no problem pulling the trap door on her sorry ass. And that is in the most broad strokes and on the finest of details. She is absolutely horrible on virtually any policy you could name, foreign or domestic, future, past, present. And, you know, and that's not because I'm some commie saying she's too far to the right. It's because I'm a pure libertarian saying she's too far to the left and the right. That she's that perfect, centrist, moderate, extremist, totalitarian who is just the perfect walking distilled everything that is wrong with politics and policy and the state in this society. Is that clear?
That's clear.
Okay. So Donald Trump, if she's George W. Bush, Donald Trump is Barack Obama. Okay. He's less worse than her, but that's not really to say anything good about him.
All right.
Now, as you just said, he said a couple of good things about the regime change, and that's probably the most redeeming parts of the speech, is he basically denounces the Bush and Obama doctrines of knocking off Israel's enemies, the secular dictators of the Middle East. But at the same time, let's get real. He supported now all 3 Iraq wars. He demanded the war in Libya in 2011 and denounced feckless, weak wimp Obama for not hurrying up and getting it on and overthrowing Gaddafi. So he can get away with flip-flopping around and saying, well, I wasn't in government at the time and I changed my mind, and maybe you heard me on the radio in 2002 saying I was for the war, but I changed my mind before that. I just can't prove it, or something. But he was bad on all these wars when he had the chance to actually be good on them. And right now, he's saying reinvade Iraq for Iraq war. If we're fighting Iraq war 2.5 now, mostly from the air, although no, not really. We have troops on the ground. It is Iraq war 3 already. He wants to go ahead and double it. It's a big secret. He's not going to tell you. Apparently, it's none of your business any more than it's ISIS's business how or when he's going to go about it. But he's reinvading Iraq because, after all, Fallujah, Mosul are in the hands of the Islamic State, as well as Raqqa in former eastern Syria, now Western Islamic State. Somebody's gonna have to get him. He's going to send in the Marines. He made it clear in no uncertain terms. Same thing with Libya. He was he was for, but now he wishes he had been against Libya War 1, I guess. But he avowed in yesterday's speech, Libya War 2. We're going to bomb their oil. We're going to blockade their oil, and we're going to attack them from the air at least. We're going to crush the Islamic State, believe me. We're going to get rid of them. And so, yeah, he's against regime change, except in the places where regime change already didn't work. Then he's going to double down. And then, instead of completely denouncing and destroying, completely obliterating Hillary with a wave of his hand on the issue, he agreed with her almost entirely that we need a safe zone in Syria so that we can save all the Christians there, which, yes, admittedly, it's all George W. Bush and Barack Obama's fault that the Christians of the Middle East are in such dire straits. But he's saying we need to invade Syria, carve out a piece of Syria and call it refugee land in defiance of the legitimate, so-called legitimate central government of that country. We're just going to invade. Just the same as we have special forces on the ground backing the Kurds in Syria right now without the permission of the government in Damascus either, and much less our Congress, but fighting against Damascus's enemies. But anyway, and that was the good part. Okay? When he said, yeah, we don't want to keep doing regime change and we don't want to keep doing what the neocons do, he then basically said everything horrible on all of those same issues. And he mentioned Egypt there. That's one that he threw in. That's exactly wrong. That's one where America has always backed Hosni Mubarak and Sadat before him, backed Hosni Mubarak for 30 years. He's Hillary Clinton's family friend, quote unquote. Obama and Hillary did everything they could to keep him in power as long as they could in 2011. But what happened was virtually the entire population of Egypt, from the coast all the way down the Nile, the whole civilization said, get rid of this guy. And that was the so-called socialists and labor types and the millennials and the city dwellers and the people, the farmers and the people in the countryside, the Muslim Brotherhood, yes, and everybody else. And they overthrew Hosni Mubarak, America's sock puppet military dictator, over Obama's dead body. And they did it anyway. And then America, they put it on the front page of the New York Times. They were that ham-handed about it. They said, well, what we want to do if we can't keep Mubarak is we want Omar Suleiman, who was the head of the Egyptian secret torture police, who did all the extraordinary renditions torturing people to death for Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. This is who Obama wanted to be the next pharaoh in line. But instead what happened was they held democratic elections and the Muslim Brotherhood won. So then a year and a half later, America and Saudis, sock puppets inside the military, overthrew them, canceled the elections and democracy there for all time, and murdered at least 1,000 people in the streets, have rounded up and executed hundreds of Muslim Brotherhood leaders since then, as though these guys were al-Qaeda. Hell, you go back to the Republican debate the other day, I think the last debate, or no, it was a few debates ago when Rubio was still in there, where they're saying, yay, Hosni Mubarak is our hero because he kills the Muslim Brotherhood. And then in the same breath, boo, Bashar al-Assad in Syria because he kills al-Qaeda. And America's on the side of al-Qaeda. When the Muslim Brotherhood is basically al-Qaeda if they were a bunch of rich old men who owned property and wanted to participate in electoral politics, right? So in other words, they're conservatives, not radicals. But we go ahead and call them and pretend they're terrorists and pretend it's all the one big terrorist conspiracy when, you know, and this is, I love the slogan, as you know, as Trump said in the speech, Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. That's right. That's because if there's an election in the Middle East and America and Israel don't like the result, we cancel it. Like in Algeria, like in Egypt, like in the Gaza Strip, like in Lebanon.
All right, so you're saying he got the story of what happened in Egypt wrong when he was listing the
Yeah, and that's an important one too, because it's true that America does these, you know, color-coded revolutions where the guy we want doesn't have the strength to win, but so they just kind of do a coup anyway. We've seen this time and again, a dozen times, and just in this century so far. But this wasn't one of those. You know, you could say that absolutely about, that what happened in Libya and Syria were America and Saudis' counter-revolution, trying to co-opt people protesting in order to get regime changes that were already on their agenda. But the counter-revolution in Egypt was the form of the military coup canceling the legitimate, and it really was like almost an inspiring fall of the Soviet Union type moment where they overthrew a dictatorship and then agreed to hold elections and abide by them, which is, not anarcho-capitalist paradise, but it's better than living under a foreign-backed military dictatorship. And yes, the Muslim Brotherhood were a bunch of horrible Republicans, but they weren't a bunch of, bin Ladenite terrorists, only in, Frank Gaffney's folklore are they that. The Egyptian ones anyway. In Syria, it's kind of a different story, of course, with the Muslim Brotherhood there.
Let's shift over to Russia for a minute, because here Trump says, I think we ought to try to get along with the Russians. I think, he said, there are going to be people who will tell me that Russia is going to be unreasonable. Well, maybe that'll happen, but we're going to have to see first. And that actually got a favorable response from the Russians. So what about that? Is that not an improvement over Gaffney and Cruz and Fiorina and the rest of them?
Absolutely, by miles. And on the most important issue on the face of the earth, the American relationship with Russia. And there's nothing more important than that. But then he turned right around, as Daniel Larison pointed out in his piece at the American Conservative.
Yeah, I read that
and
too.
And denounced Obama for basically changing America's mind, so to speak, on the so-called missile defense system that they were going to put into Poland and into the Czech Republic, which the people of those countries absolutely didn't want, which George Bush laughingly, and Obama too, just no one in the whole world bought it, as they laughingly claimed that this was to protect Eastern Europe, our allies like Poland, from Iran, which doesn't have missiles that could ever get to Poland, has no history of any negative relations with Poland whatsoever, and was never making nukes in the first place, as we talked about a million times. And it was obvious that the missile defense system was for Russia, and that it's And it's also obvious, Tom, that it's not a missile defense system when you are a world empire and you are bringing the entire, not you, the United States of America is bringing the entire Warsaw Pact and even the former Soviet republics into our NATO military alliance up to their doorstep. And call it missile defense when really it's like bringing armor to a fistfight. It's enabling us to achieve first strike capability against the Russians, which means a cancellation of mutual assured destruction and the idea in the minds of the goons at the Pentagon that they could get away with one good first strike and take out enough of Russia's retaliatory capability and be able to shoot down the rest as they try to launch it, that we could get away with it and win. And then, of course, that means that on the Russian side, that their trigger finger has to get that much itchier as they move from launch on warning 1 to launch on warning 2, or whatever they call it, where they have to take every false alarm that much more seriously when they know that that is the American doctrine. So, in other words, if you want to end the Cold War with Russia, cancel the GD so-called missile defense system going into Poland. That's step one. So why is that cowardice and weakness when it's Barack Obama? That's the one thing he should have praised about Obama. And it just goes to show that this guy's all over the place, basically. You can't put stock in anything. I don't know. Dan Sanchez calls it Horton's Law. That I say that if a politician makes a good promise, forget it. If he makes a bad promise, you can take it to the bank, right? Like Obama said, I'm going to get us out of Iraq. Yeah, right. He said, I'm going to double down in Afghanistan. Yes, of course he is, right? No doubt about it. And that's basically what we have here is Trump goes, I'm for and against everything. Yeah, well, wherever he's bad on something, you can pretty much bet on that. And wherever he's good on something, how come he can't be consistent on even that one issue for more than a minute?
And according to the Larison piece, he's even misleading about that in that it's not like they've completely dropped the idea of the missile defense system. Now they want to maybe try to arrange it through NATO. So even there, he's only technically correct in what he's saying about the gutting of the missile defense systems in the Czech Republic and Poland. All right, so I agree. Look, I read this shortly before this conversation we're having right now. I didn't read it the day he gave it. And all I did was I looked at some headlines and I looked at people's reactions, and there were hysterical reactions on the part of the foreign policy establishment, and there were some guardedly optimistic reactions on the part of some people I trust. So I thought, well, maybe it was a decent speech after all. And then I read this thing, and I thought maybe this will be a really significant thing, and I was so utterly disappointed by this thing because, yeah, it is true that he will say some things, as we acknowledged before, that Ted Cruz won't say. Well, all right, and that John Bolton won't say. But it is so overwhelmed and swamped by the Iran deal is bad and Obama bows to our enemies and Joe Biden hates Israel. And I mean, what is this? I could read that in commentary. I could read that in National Review. But in a way, this tells me as much about the neocons as it does about Trump. If they get that hysterical over what looks to me, and I wanted to like this speech, I'll be honest with you. Of course, we all want him. We want anybody to give a good foreign policy speech. I wanted to like this speech. If this feckless speech with 3 mildly pacific statements in it is enough to make them hysterical, then they are certifiably insane.
Well, there's no doubt about that. I mean, if the neocons' enemies, if that's how we judge people is just whether the neocons hate them or not, then we got to love everyone because everyone's against them and they're against everyone. They never take responsibility. Everything they destroy is everyone else's fault. So, he's certainly on the outside of them. But then again, he says, I'm going to hire a whole new team of guys. Well, okay, like in my fantasy, he hires Doug Bandow to be his national security advisor or something. But is that going to happen? No. Who's he going to hire? He's going to go right to all the very same think tanks that all Republicans go to get their foreign policy guys. And you go back, he always talked about how much he loves John Bolton. Now, there's a no-nonsense guy who knows just what to do, just what Richard Pearl wants him to do. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I know it. Now, I'm looking at this. I'm looking at the passages that I picked out, and this is one that I think Larison also picked out. He says, this is Trump, We're getting out of the nation building business. Good. And instead, focusing on creating stability in the world. Oh, all right. Well, what would that look like? What would that mean?
Yeah.
What would that amount to?
Well, and that wasn't the worst part. I mean, I think really all he meant by that was basically we're not in the deliberately creating chaos and overthrowing governments and making big changes to other people's societies' business anymore.
Yeah,
Renouncing the Wolfowitz doctrine, which, again, if I really believed him, then, I guess that would be great. But then again, like you mentioned, the Iran deal. First of all, he lied about the Iran deal and said that the Iranians have been breaking their end of the deal, which is just completely ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't think they have. Yeah.
And then, that really possibly foreshadows him ruining the Iran deal. And then what happens when Iran says, that's it, we're not abiding by this anymore? Or, God forbid, they even withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and their previous safeguards agreement that already made sure that their nuclear program was civilian only, or God forbid, even do something that makes it look that they can even be framed credibly for trying to make nukes. Does anybody think he would hesitate for a second? I'd take him at his word that if he could come up with a case that the Iranians were making nukes, that he would absolutely attack. And that he very well might drive them out of the deal and create just such a crisis,
Yeah, I mean
Which, by the way, again, Hillary is absolutely horrible on this. Obama could have had a deal with Iran in 2010, but Hillary sabotaged it. She should have been banished, on an ice thingamajig and sent out like an Eskimo grandma after that, and that should have been the end of her.
Yeah, well, at least, I don't know, at least I'd like to start calling her Eskimo grandma. That's actually a pretty good... I'm gonna steal that.
It's just the ice floe thing. If they have a name for that, where they put the grandma on the
I don't know if
piece
there's
of
a name
ice and
for
send
it,
her out
but
to sea.
Ice floe grandma is good enough.
Okay.
Let me read you this passage. However, unlike other candidates for the presidency, war and aggression will not be my first instinct. You cannot have a foreign policy without diplomacy. A superpower understands that caution and restraint are really truly signs of strength. Now, maybe before this speech, I might have been inclined to say, well, I think on balance he would be, and by the way, I actually do think that on balance it's likely that he would be more restrained than a Ted Cruz. I still believe that. But unfortunately, because of the rest of the speech, this comes off sounding like the kind of flourishes that we got from George W. Bush, and you know how much that wound up amounting to.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, that's obviously the first point, but what was most important about that to me was not that he meant it or that it was really a slight at Cruz. I think that was an attack on Hillary. Or maybe that's just my confirmation bias because I want so badly for him to understand what Sanders could not, that attacking Hillary Clinton on foreign policy is how to win. Characterizing her as the Dick Cheney loose cannon. God knows what war she's going to get us into, folks, but she's going to get your son killed, believe me. That kind of attack on Hillary Clinton, she's wide open for and has no defense against because she, again, literally is the worst human on the face of the earth. And so if that's what he meant by that unlike some people in this race, my first instinct isn't aggression, never mind Cruz, but as an attack on Hillary, as for, foreshadowing the general election run against her, that's what I really want. Because I think if he does that at all, it's going to score real points. And if he learns that and repeats it, and he spends the whole campaign doing that, I think, first of all, he'll prevent her from being the president of the United States. And secondly, he might actually come to believe it, that, you know what, if I was a crazy, ridiculous pinhead like her, I would be for the next war, but I'm not. And, I don't think he really knows or believes anything. So he's kind of learning right now. And I'm thinking the fact of how good a politics that could be, it should be the best reinforcement for how true it is, too. That, guess what? The rank and file American right is sick and tired of war, too. The left puts up with it because it's the Democrats doing it, but they don't really love it like right-wingers love it. But the right-wingers are exhausted too, man. They're over it. And, sorry, can't help it. Another Rand Paul failure to understand, ding, 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 that he could have absolutely been as anti-war as possible, and it would have only helped him. There was a thing in Politico where he says now that he's not running for president, now he can be more libertarian. Now he doesn't have to moderate his views so much. Yeah, how did moderating your views help? Dude, none. That's why he lost, but has learned absolutely nothing from it, just as I predicted, because what a terrible person he is. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, well, look, you and I have had numerous discussions about that situation. That's most unfortunate. But yeah, it's funny that you said that, because in the back of my mind, when you were talking about Trump, I was thinking the same thing about Rand, that it was the same failure to appreciate that there is I mean, the fact that Trump, even if it's only superficially, is running on a so-called America First platform, the very fact that he's doing that and getting away with it, the fact that he is sometimes at least saying things like, hey, I want to try to bring about peace in the Middle East, so shoot me. The fact that he's even saying that sometimes and they still vote for him anyway shows that as an obstacle, that the foreign policy as an obstacle to a libertarian success was always overstated.
Yeah, and I want to get back to what you said about George W. Bush in 2000, talking about a humble foreign policy and all that. George Bush never said, yeah, you know what we're going to do? We're going to dip bullets in pigs' blood and shoot them Muslims, and that'll teach them good to mess with us, which is this guy's line. We've got to ditch the Geneva Conventions. Not from the libertarian anti-internationalist point of view that we would have such a perfect rule of law here that we have no need for such thing because we're way even better than a Geneva Convention could ever be. Yeah, right. He wants rid of it because he wants to torture people to death. And he said so openly over and over again, far beyond waterboarding. Well, waterboarding is drowning someone to the absolute edge of death. To the brink of death, the death spiral, as the CIA doctors call it, okay? And then they save their life, basically, and then do it again, right? They drown them and then bring them back right at the last second, okay? So far beyond waterboarding. And hey, they're barbarians. The Islamic State, they cut off people's heads, so we can do whatever we want with them. And there is no limit. As long as they respect no law, I, as president, will respect no law when it comes to how I fight wars against them. And you know what? Again, when a politician makes a bad promise, you can take that to the bank. You know what? It's not like he really is such a Ron Paul peacenik that he has to say something tough so as to not look like too much of a wimp. No, Donald Trump doesn't suffer from the wimp problem right now, okay? That's not why he's doing that. That's what he believes. And, and in fact, they said, well, some of the CIA guys say that they won't follow your orders to torture people. He goes, oh, yeah, they'll follow my orders all right. I'll be their commander, and they'll torture. And this is a guy we're debating actually having to, being the president of the United States of America. And not that, again, it's just Obama. I mean, Obama tortures people. George Bush tortures people. I'm not saying that, but like an avowed torturer with blood dripping off his fangs, rubbing his hands together about how he's going to torture people, how he's going to target the family members of people that his government accuses of being terrorists. I mean, we're way the hell off the deep end here, Tom, by far.
Well, listen, I want to, you know what, actually, let me say a quick thing, because when you talked about waterboarding, I know your point is that this would go well beyond waterboarding, but one of the YouTube videos that has stayed with me over the years was that video when Mancow agreed to be waterboarded. Did you ever see this?
I vaguely remember it, but I don't really remember it.
Yeah. Okay. Mancow was like a right-wing radio guy, and he was mocking people who said that waterboarding was torture. And by the way, I was on Mancow's show a couple of times, and I think I have been on hundreds, if not thousands, of radio shows, and I would say he was by far the worst host I ever interacted with. I literally could not get a word in edgewise, and it wasn't because I'm some boring old pointy-headed professor type and I make for bad radio. I do not make for bad radio. The guy just wouldn't let me talk. It was horrible. And so then I was booked on him a third time for another book, and I just told the publisher, I am not going on that show. And they said, but he has a huge audience. You've got to go. And I said, no, yeah, and the whole audience will know that maybe there might have been some guy on the line. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting on this is a tangent off a tangent. This video shows him consenting to be waterboarded so that he could be the tough guy and show everybody, you see, this is just a little water, up your nose or whatever. It's no big deal. And after a very short period of time, I mean, I don't know, it might have been a couple of seconds, he stood right up, or he said, he signaled it to stop, and his first words were, "That is torture," and that blew me away.
After one moment. Yeah, Christopher Hitchens did the same thing, too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He volunteered to be waterboarded and said, absolutely, it's torture, too.
I didn't know about that, about Hitchens.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and they always sell this. And you think about that. I mean, I remember when I was a little bitty kid, the first time I ever learned about torture, it was like the mythological Chinese water torture was the first time I ever encountered the concept, really. Maybe Darth Vader and Princess Leia with that hovering robot. But anyway, Chinese water torture. That's the epitome of barbarianism, right? But, when it's us, it's an enhanced interrogation technique, and we wear white coats and have a sterile white room, and it's all very scientific, and no one's really responsible because we have a piece of paper right here that says it's okay.
That's
and
right.
Meanwhile, we're drowning people to death almost. And then, but even in the news, it's always simulated drowning that simulates the sensation of what it might be like to drown and all this kind of stuff. It's drowning. And listen, you can read the Red Cross report about this, okay? It's drowning people into what they call the death spiral, where your brain stem is shutting down. You are going through the tunnel of light to heaven, and then they punch you in the gut and put you right side up again and make you puke all the water out and then do it again. It's absolute medieval horror. So whatever they did to Mancow was, the radio version, the radio show host version of that, the nice, gentle one.
I think I will I'll put that video, I'll dig out let me write this down. I'll dig out the Mancow video because people should watch that.
And I overstated the pig's blood thing real quick before we go, Tom. He didn't say, yeah, this is what we're going to do. But yesterday, the same day as the big speech, he brought up again the myth of General Pershing in the Philippines dipping bullets in pig's blood and executing 49 Muslim Moro rebels, and then, or however you pronounce it, I may have said that wrong, and then sending the 50th one off to Warren. Now, it's true that some people in the Philippines war did commit war crimes and bury pigs and sprinkle pigs' blood on Muslims that they had killed, and it's in dispute whether Pershing ever had anything to do with that, but it's not true, the firing squad story he told. But anyway, the real point is that this is his idea of setting the stage of what the war on terror is going to be like under him, is that we're going to hit him where it really hurts. We're going to shoot him with, not literally maybe, but, we're going to make it impossible for them to go to heaven the way we treat their corpses, right? This is the attack that we're going to wage against them, and that'll learn them. And this is the front runner, man. This is the nominee, pretty much locked up. And again, I can't help but still prefer him to Hillary. God help me.
Yeah. All right.
Because she's already killed 1.5 million people in the world, and he only is about to.
And I know there are some Bernie people who on principle won't vote for her, but it's going to be a shockingly high number who will wind up voting for her. It depresses me even to think about it. We got to stop. Basically, we got to call it quits here.
Just so you know, I had I had at least a solid dozen or 20 more things on my list to complain about from that speech. It's really pretty bad.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to link to the speech because you really should look at it. It's only take a few minutes to skim it.
By the way, which transcript do you have? Because the transcript and what he actually said were quite a bit different in some cases. Anyway.
Oh, were they really? I actually don't know which one. I didn't know that it mattered.
I think the New York Times one purported to be not, the passed out copies, but what he actually said, although, who knows.
All right, well, I'll try and dig out because of course what matters is what he actually said. So I'll dig that out. Link to it at tomwoods.com/652. Can you tell people, because I actually don't know, I know, you had a thing with LRN. How do people hear you now?
Oh, just go to scotthorton.org. Basically, the full show feed is more or less a dead letter, although, as you said, I did do a Trump thing on it yesterday on the full show feed, what used to be the full show feed. But basically, right now, I'm trying to do, and this week has been a real slow week for him, but I'm trying to still do 2 or 3 interviews a day and put those out on the podcast feed. And I've had some really good ones lately, including Ron Paul and Patrick Coburn and Robert Pape, and a lot of really great ones. So that's all just scotthorton.org/interviews to sign up for that.
Okay, I'll make sure and link to that at tomwoods.com/652 as well. All right, thanks a lot, Scott. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.
All right, everybody, before I let you go, let's see a couple things. I mentioned last time, of course, about the phenomenon of people who can work from anywhere. I can pretty much work from anywhere. It's a really great thing, and I can work my own hours and all that stuff. Well, this is a phenomenon now in the age of the internet, and there's a guy whom I have followed for quite some time who has done this 10 times. He's created 10 virtual businesses that he can run from his computer. He doesn't have to have a fixed office. He can go where he wants to. So, for instance, I've recorded a whole bunch of these episodes in all different states over the past year or so, and I'm just able to do that, and it's great. Well, at a time when people feel more insecure in their jobs and they feel threatened by automation more than ever, a lot of people are attracted to this kind of lifestyle. And there is, for a limited time, a free video series that walks you through the basic steps of how do you start something like this. How do you abandon the traditional office 9-to-5 structure? How do you start a virtual business? So the program is called The Virtual CEO, and you can check it out at tomwoods.com/CEO. Don't forget also the free history course that I've got that is on the U.S. presidents, and it's the truth about the U.S. presidents. It's the real thing. It's not the phony baloney president worship that we get in school, but the real truth about the presidents, and you can check that out at freehistorycourse.com. All right, thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit TomWoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.